Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, I want to have an in-depth look into Envy for Descent. As it has become available again, it was missing in action. Not sure if it was a bug that prevented it from being there, or if we just got super unlucky. several degrees there. But yeah, in either case, it is back, and actually quite recently, I yesterday used it to reach loop 48, and consistently as well. With Envy, you can reach loop 40 quite consistently with certain setups. We're going to be discussing what I used. Basically, this is, you can kind of see it as a build showcase, but then for Descent. This isn't also the guide for Descent. That will still be upcoming, and that will contain all of the information. Here, we're just going to kind of consider just one rotation, one certain build for it, and we're going to use that. And yeah, we'll also discuss some of the numbers, as I've prepared some spreadsheets, kind of looking at some of the choices we can make within Envy. And actually, I am, for my next runs, going to change one decision that I did make for this run. So we'll go over all of those things, but first we're just going to go over how to run an Envy run, basically. What picks to make and how to get past Nemesis first, and then just go into the deep parts of it. I did do this in a group setting. It is recommended generally for deep runs to do it with group, just so also you're not alone, because that run took 6 hours 49 minutes to reach 48, and we didn't even really die on 48. We could have gone much further. We just chose to end it there because it was 2 o'clock at night and I needed to sleep, and so did other people. So yeah, we'll go over a lot of those things. We'll go, and everything will be timestamped, of course, down below, so you can jump around if you want to. And we'll go get started in basically going an overview of the run. And to kind of get the lexicon down to start with, we have the Descent game mode. For those that haven't played around in Descent, it is actually a very enjoyable game mode. I actually enjoy it a lot for it's quite different. I don't get to have access to all of my builds and my loadouts that I've built up all over the years. Every time going in, it's kind of a fresh start, as roguelikes kind of are. We, of course, then have permanent upgrades that can come out of it. And, of course, the big prize of reconstructed caches, which we can both get and buy for NSA Tech, which is the currency, the permanent currency from there. And with Descent as well, there are rotations. There are several rotations available. You can see, for instance, on the map, although quite often it doesn't show nowadays. If it doesn't show, if you're hovering over it, you can tab over and tab back. That actually will make it show what a rotation is up there. And on the upper left, you can see it is Envy, and it rotates in 4 hours, 51 minutes there. The rotations are quite different. Each rotation has some of its pros, some of its cons. Generally, Envy is considered one of the most powerful ones, and there are good reasons for that. Wrath and Gluttony can definitely work pretty well as well. Actually, Wrath and Greed, sorry, can work pretty well as well. Gluttony and Sloth are considered some of the weaker ones, but still definitely enough for a Nemesis run. And then as well, with Descent, you have 2 types of runs. You either go deep, or you go for a Nemesis run. The Nemesis run is mostly done for the weekly project, where you have it for the comms, as any collector will kind of go for all of the comms. And there's, for instance, for me as well, one character that I weekly run through Descent just to get all of the comms. But then there's also deep runs, and the benefit for deep runs is especially that NSA Tech, so that when we go to Wally here, who has the shop, we can buy a lot of reconstructed caches for $297 each, or a lot of exotic caches if we wanted to. For instance, here 11k kind of saved up. I'm actually done with all of the blueprints from Descent for now, until they fix it or add more, because yeah, there's 8 that need to be fixed, and there is going to be more next season, of course. Having rambled on a bit for it, let's actually look at Envy. And one of the things with Envy and what makes it so good, both for Nemesis run and deep runs, is that it comes with basically all usable exotic talents. We have Plague, we have Agonizing, Incessant, Bullet Hell, Payment in Kind, and Liberty. Basically the Pestilence, the Diamondback, the Chatterbox, Bullet King, and Backfire, and the Liberty D50 exotic. That's the talents that we get. We can make a really strong combo, and we're kind of going to discuss that in there with Agonizing, Incessant Chatter, and Bullet Hell. We have enough good reds. The thing is with, for instance, Wrath. Wrath actually has better reds, but it doesn't have as good exotic talents. That makes it that on the red and the exotic talents, they kind of are around the same damage output, mostly because as well in Wrath, we do have Intimidate, which is a really strong talent, of course, also another separate multiplier, because here in Envy, we basically need to overlap two multipliers at some point, because we basically run out of different pools to put our different picks in. We'll go over what I picked, for instance, and also actually we'll go over one of my teammates who ran with me, Pomic, who also gave me his build picture, so we're kind of see his setup as well. And actually, technically, his setup was actually the correct one, so I would recommend that one. And then, yeah, we have the blues are always, with all rotations, all the same. The reds are definitely quite different, so are the exotic talents. But especially Envy's power lies within its yellows. We do get off Trauma, and also then alongside of that, we don't just have the eyeless that you would have with Wrath. You also have Ignited and Sadist. All of these together as well, it's not just that they do a lot of damage, which they do, because all of these are separate multipliers. We'll kind of look at that as well and see how high these actually add up and how silly numbers you can make with them. The thing is as well, they're continuously doing CC things for you. So your, especially Eyeless and Ignited will CC enemies. The bleed isn't that impactful, but it's just more damage. And then the bleed is also very easy to apply. Both as well, Trauma is then also triggering the blinds and the bleeds. So going into it, let's first discuss how we kind of set up for going Nemesis, because that's of course the first hurdle. And then we're kind of freed up for the rest. And to start discussing kind of how to set up the run, as we discussed just a second ago, the Nemesis is the first hurdle. You kind of set up in certain ways for them. This is the picture now on screen. It will be linked down below as well, and you can kind of go to this as basically as a build picture. It is in a shared thing. Also, if you scroll down, because the upper one is basically what I ended up on. At the end of the run with all pens, having as my setup, and together with that, Pomic, who went to that point as well with me, is here as well. We had also two others joining us, Hai and Marin joining us. Marin had to had some technical difficulties early on, and annoyingly got separated from us, and annoyingly you can't get back into this and that way. Hai went to with us all the way to 40, but then they had real life things to do, and we went a little bit further just to kind of get our PBs kind of higher, because also this was 6 hours 49 minutes. That's also why usually my runs kind of don't go much further than 40. Because just this is kind of the maximum I'm kind of willing to do in one sitting of a game. Although I've done 12 hours of Division and stuff, but especially also one game mode. Now, the setup here, as you can see, is, as we'll discuss it kind of when we go deeper, is Incessant Chatter plus Bullet Hell plus Agonizing. And then together with that, a Surgical, Obliterate, Strained, Allegro, and here I have Rifleman plus Vigilance. You'll notice here, if you go to Pomic's, he has kind of, he has the same Surgical, Obliterate, Strained, Allegro, but then Vigilance and Critical, and that's actually the better choice. We'll go into the numbers towards the end where we'll kind of discuss that, but yeah, the same exotic picks. You might see both of us having a blue Vector and kind of an LMG as the secondary there. And then as well, on the yellows, we basically both have a Trauma, Eyeless, Sadist, Ignited, together with Extra, which might seem weird with Bullet Hell, and Optimized. Optimized, of course, for just the weapon handling. And that is the exact same on his end as well. Basically, on the blues as well, we're kind of the same, except, he has Efficient towards the end. I took Leadership just for the giggles and some blue armor. But mostly what you want to have is Preservation and Clutch. That's going to be your main healers, especially with Agonizing. Clutch can be pretty powerful. Later on, added in Entrench and Adrenaline Rush and Insulated, just for a little bit more survivability, and then joked around with a little bit with leadership. This is the end build, but actually getting to this part, especially for getting Incessant Chatter and Bullet Hell going together, we kind of use a different setup to kind of get here. And then once we have it locked in, because the thing that you need to know is that Incessant Chatter, of course, works the same as it does for the Chatterbox. If you reload with enemies nearby up to 15 meters, they will give you up to 5 stacks. If you have 5 stacks, you have the highest buff, which is 100% RPM increase, which is basically a doubling of your damage, except of course it's additive to Allegro. Yeah, that is very strong, but of course it's kind of hard to keep, especially for instance, yeah, if we try to think about a Vector, which has 19 rounds base and 38, even with extra at 10. You couldn't keep that. You would lose it on names, you would lose it on rogues and stuff like that. So what we can do is once this has 5, we can actually lock it in with Bullet Hell. That is what Bullet Hell is especially doing here, because Incessant as well has a reload mechanic. And this is kind of the setup actually for this run. But first, let's actually go back to the Nemesis before we get ahead of ourselves. Because for Nemesis, generally, what you would want is exotic talents that are either going to trigger without any real prerequisites, or that you can kind of keep. So in the case, actually, for here, really the best one is Agonizing. If you can get Agonizing as your first pick, because of course you at an end of loop 1, you'll get to pick 1 exotic talent. If you can get Agonizing at that point, that is the early pick, definitely. If you have to pick one of the other ones, you can't really pick Bullet Hell before Chatterbox if you're going deep, because we're discussing it kind of here as a deep run. You can actually take Incessant Chatter, and if you can do some trickery and get yourself a shock trap or a healing trap, they will generally toss those at you. You can actually use that as each of those will count as an enemy. So they will usually toss them around you, of course. And then if you hit reload, even during the Nemesis fight, you will be able to keep up Incessant Chatter. But that's, of course, a little bit of a workaround, but that's more trivia than useful. Together with that, you could even go Plague or Payment in Kind early on, if you don't get things like Incessant or Agonizing early on, just to get through Nemesis. And that's the nice thing about here. The worst picks aren't that bad. With most of the other, for instance, Rat, there are 3 basically useless ones, because Dr. Home is in there, Kinetic Momentum is in there. You generally don't want any of those for the Nemesis fight. That is a nice thing about Envy, and that's why it's so consistent as well for Nemesis runs. Now, setup-wise, the same exists there as well. You kind of want to, if you get, for instance, Agonizing, Strained and Obliterate kind of become available, because even with the Nemesises, while they're running around, you can usually pelt the one that is kind of marked. You can, even if you're just doing Nemesis runs, take Unhinged. Unhinged is actually in this rotation, and Unhinged is a really good talent, as most of us will know, for especially it's one of the 2 talents that really carries Wrath, this and Intimidate together. But in Wrath, we have Steady-Handed and we have Braced. In this rotation, we only really have Optimized. That means that Unhinged is a trap for deep runs. You can't take this to 10, because this will go all the way. This is 25, minus 25, minus 25 for the first one, and then minus 10 for every subsequent step. So you end up at minus 115 on both. Optimized only goes up to 50. Now, if you need to also know how these numbers kind of work, one thing I will have linked down below is actually the Reddit spreadsheet, as I oftentimes call it. That is this thing. It is linked down below. It also has in here Descent talents. This is a really good utility. You can just go in here, and it both has the base of it, the formula of it. So a lot of the talents are different nowadays, especially the ones they added in. For instance, all of the ones that are status effect based, the first step is 20, and then each subsequent step is only 5, which is just something that you kind of need to know. But also you can just look up here. So especially the tiering here, you can kind of read up on. And it also just has all of the tiers all the way up to tier 10 kind of listed here. This is a really good resource for just looking up things. So just so you know, just to add that in here as well. But then, yeah, going back for Nemesis run, generally what you want is a lot of things that will just trigger. So for instance, you want, especially if you're like solo for a Nemesis, picking closer personal or pummel, you're guaranteeing it for yourself that that won't trigger. If you're fighting one Nemesis, close and personal is gonna, if you're solo and you're fighting one Nemesis, close and personal will trigger after the Nemesis is dead. So you don't want to pick, the picks for Nemesis are quite different than they are for a deeper run, because for a deeper run, you could go, for instance, yeah, closer personal or pummel or things like that. And even unhinged, if you're just going Nemesis run, you can actually put a few into unhinged, and then even if you're going deep, you can later on change it. But yeah, as we talked earlier, the picks are kind of Allegro, Strained, Obliterate, Surgical. That's basically the 4 main picks. You definitely want those. And you can also use those for going Nemesis. And then there's actually a kind of like a triple that you can kind of choose between, and that is Rifleman, Vigilance, and Critical. All of these are going into pools that are kind of already filled in. Rifleman going to weapon damage, which will be with the red cores. Vigilance will be going together into Obliterate, into total weapon damage. And Critical, of course, is going to go into the same pool as Strained. So they'll kind of pull together. Now, of course, some of the other choices that you could make here also go into those. One thing as well, you could actually take Pummel, and that's actually the trick that we'll use for Incessant Chatter. But first, yeah, for the Nemesis, and then especially getting Trauma, and if you can, all 3 of the CCs, even though you can't consistently trigger them with the unkill. If you have a fire cam or a fire sticky, you can make Ignited happen. A Blinder Firefly or Trauma will trigger Eyeless. Anything like special ammo, hollow points, explosive rounds, or Trauma will trigger Sadist for you. So it is quite handy to have the Sadist effect ones especially. And if you are in a group setting, if someone gets a kill, they might also trigger the next point of it. Or, you know, people will automatically the traumas will kind of get staggered from each other. So, you know, someone's trauma will hit later. So yeah, you can especially make good use of Eyeless and Sadist. And then you make it up to the Nemesis and you murder them. And of course, the other trick to know for newer players, if you are going up against a Nemesis, they get the skills that you get, group-wide, basically. Each Nemesis is a representation of each one of the players, basically. The skills to go for overall is any of the stickies, so either Fire, Explosive, or EMP sticky is perfectly fine, because they're easy to avoid. Fire Chem and Foam are pretty useful against them, especially here. Fire as well, you can get Ignited going. Foam is just a really good pick because the CC of it puts them in there. It makes them pop up basically, and you know, keeps them in place and kind of CCs them. It is actually one of the best picks. It will make Nemesis runs a lot easier. You can't pick the other chems. Neither Oxy or Healing Chem is recommended because whatever you pick, they will have as well. Or if it is for some skills that they generally won't have, like shields and stuff, they'll have a random one. And then as well, any of the Fireflies will become a Blinder Firefly. A Blinder Firefly by itself is actually useful against them because, again, you can make Eyeless happen with that. And also it is CC, and it is actually pretty effective because they don't really fire the way that they do when they're on fire or just foamed. But even a Burster or Demolisher Firefly can be picked just so they get a Blinder, because that doesn't kill you. Because taking, for instance, any turret, it becomes a turret for them, especially, you know, something like a Mortar or Oxy can be really dangerous if picked. A lot of things like the pulses, any of the pulses, decoy, and any of the shields will become a random skill for them. So they'll just get randomly something. And that can be quite dangerous as well, because they might randomly get a Bomber Drone, which is really dangerous, Seekers, which are really dangerous, Mortar, which can be really deadly. You don't want any of that. So usually you want to fill up your skill slots to make sure that they don't have that. And Generally, that means for us that, yeah, we'll go with any of the stickies or firecam on foam or any of the bursters or any of the fireflies, either burster or demolisher or preferably blinder, for up to the Nemesis. And then later on, we're free to pick after the Nemesis. So yeah, that's kind of getting up to the Nemesis and then beating them. Beating them isn't generally hard. Solo, it's actually quite easy. Solo scaling, as always, is kind of the easiest scaling. Four-man scaling is kind of the hardest, but also not unbeatable. Actually, quite recently, what Envy helped for me to do as well is to get the flawless Nemesis run in, where you have to get to Nemesis and beat them without without any of the people going down, not just dying, but not going down at all either, as yeah, we have there as well. Envy is also really good for that, just because of all the CC that kind of happens with it. So we defeated the Nemesis. Now, how do we go further? Let's discuss that. And also, if you want to see actually the full run, as I did it, of course, on stream, it is available on the IKEA VODs channel. I will link to the specific VOD down below as well, of course. So if you want to kind of look through the run for yourself as well. But then, yeah, to discuss how we kind of went further, because of course once you beat the Nemesis, you're kind of freed up. And for instance, there you see me towards the end, having had a Revive Hive and a turret. That is my preferred picks. Generally, Revive Hive should come as no surprise, of course. It can revive yourself, it can revive others. Especially, I generally take 6 skill tiers as well, so it can always revive others as well. And together with that, it is with a turret, because the turret is actually just a better decoy. Generally, you can actually put it just in front of a door. It will have a much longer duration than a decoy. It will be there for an entire room, and yeah, it will actually generally be just as good as a decoy. A decoy generally does attract targets a little bit better, but especially if you put it just at the door, it works pretty well. Then, yeah, what we kind of need to discuss is, as you see there, the picks that I have kind of course, we had Surgical, Obliterate, Strain, and Allegro. That's kind of a set picks. And then we kind of have some extras that we could pick from there, where I have, for instance, Rifleman Vigilance, and then Pomic had Critical and Vigilance. You have basically out of 3, but before you actually reach that point, because this is the trick of Envy, basically, and this is the one that I kind of wanted to explain, because if we get like the perfect setup, Agonizing would be the first pick. If I get a second pick, I'm already going to pick Incessant Chatter. But then, generally, I kind of will carry this. Even if I get a third pick, I will not pick Bullet Hell yet after that, because generally you can't lock in this 5 quite easily. So what you generally need for this is actually a big box LMG and several extras. Extra, of course, is just plus 10 magazine capacity. Now, the thing is, because there is, of course, Lucky Shot. Lucky Shot is the same 10% magazine capacity and then other things as well, which is, in this case, Missing Shot from cover, have a 10% chance to return to your magazine. So you would think Lucky Shot is the better pick, but I'm picking Extra, and there is a very specific reason for that. We hadn't actually tested in this run, so they might have somewhat recently fixed this, but we weren't going to try it out for this run. We just wanted the security. Lucky Shot plus high RPM Allegro, or high RPMs on a weapon plus Allegro plus Incessant Chatter plus Bullet Hell. So if you have high RPMs in general, even without Incessant Chatter, just getting Allegro pretty high in other, for instance, Rat also breaks it, plus Bullet Hell is causes issues where your weapon will run out. Not out of reserve ammo, but just the magazine will go to 0, and it won't reload, and you can't, of course, reload when Bullet Hell is active, because it's supposed to be infinite, but it will actually jam up. This is an issue that a lot of people will have encountered. You might have not known what causes it, but that is the thing. Lucky Shots combination with a Bullet Hell and high RPMs in any form kind of breaks in some way, especially for low magazine things like Vectors, although especially with high Allegro or high Incessant Chatter, even things like FAMAS and stuff, which would go 60 rounds, for instance, do break as well. It is an oddity, and that's why we avoid Lucky Shot and just take extra just to not have issues. Because, for instance, in my run there, I had 0 issues with that. None of us had issues with that. Extra works perfectly fine for the purposes that we have it for. And that is actually because, of course, bullet hell is kind of carrying there. We'll kind of discuss why we still actually even keep extra for later on. But the setup for it will become having incessant chatter. And then as well, for some of the run, I would have had 1 pummel. That would have been somewhat in the last slots, so either in the rifleman slot or in the vigilant slot, so that I could already start building up these other ones, but I would take just 1 pummel. And that's because pummel, of course, every 3 kills that you make, even with tier 1, and this doesn't change, only the weapon damage of it changes. 3 consecutive kills refill the magazine and grants damage. We don't really care about it because we're not going to keep it ever. The incessant, of course, also has 50% of your kills on magazine refill. If you have a big enough mag, although around loop 8-ish and stuff, you can actually go without pummel if you really needed to, because this is going to be enough. You should be powerful enough at those points. Pummel kind of makes it sure that with that 30-round LMG, or the 100-round LMG, with a few extras, with pummel and incessant chatter, if you make sure that you get your 5 stacks, so you generally, what I do is stand somewhere where there are 2 doors kind of close to each other with my pistol out, empty out a few rounds of my pistol, hit the reload on that, get the 5 stacks of chatterbox. That, of course, then carries over to all of your weapons. That's how it works in Descent. A lot of the talents will cover all of your weapons. Once you have the 5 stack of incessant chatter, you want to have that big box LMG, and then keeping it up with basically the incessant chatter, with the pummel, with the extra, because of course extra will affect how much you get out of pummel and how big the magazine size is for incessant chatter. You will try to keep that going, and especially getting it through boss rooms towards the end, till you get your 3rd or maybe even much later exotic choice, where you lock incessant chatter in with bullet hell. If you can get it to the end of the boss room, and you get exotic choice, and you have this at 5, you can lock it in with bullet hell, and at that point you're kind of freed up. That is the nice thing, because I see a lot of people going for going either agonizing or bullet hell, which kind of makes sense from a damage standpoint, but there is locking these 2 in allows you to do other things. So for instance here, the vector that we have there, without it, if we just had, for instance, agonizing, incessant chatter, and say payment in kind or plague, I couldn't have this vector, because this vector, of course, is 39 rounds. That's not going to be enough against a lot of the enemies, warhounds, rogues, all of those kind of things, named. It would not work. But that vector is a lot higher burst, of course, by itself than any other weapon around it. Same for, like, instance, an L86 versus some of the lower firing weapons. And of course, if your burst, if you can kind of get it out of the base damage, you're basically giving up talent choices, exotic talent choices there. Because, yeah, with a big box LMG, you could get by with just incessant chatter, pummel, and extras, and maybe even lucky shot in there. Because you wouldn't break it, because it would generally not reach empty. But the downside of it is those weapons are also much higher or much lower on their own base burst DPS. It's kind of like, you know, running an police M4 nowadays versus a FAMAS or an FT1000. Yes, it is more accurate and stuff, but you're giving up damage. Same here. This allows me to go for a vector. Now, you may see there that I have an RPK as well. That's kind of my ammo conservation weapon. Public was going with a M60. And the vector can just melt close by things. So what I was doing later on is basically the vector would be used on the closed door. And then if I had a far door to shoot at, the RPK would come out and we would melt the far doors. But that setup of kind of getting a setup going first to get incessant chatter to 5, and then kind of lock it in with bullet hell. And then actually afterwards, as you see on this picture, once bullet hell is in there, pummel, I just kept one stack of it and it went out. It got replaced in my case with vigilance. I think it was in the last slot. In Pummel's case, whatever he picked there. And we just drop it. We do keep extra though, because extra actually with our friend of bullet hell, for every 100 bullets that hit an enemy, replenish some ammo to you and your allies' reserves. So because of that, actually, it is actually kind of handy to have a little bit of a bigger box mag, because you get a refresh of this basically. This is for every 100 bullets hit. Without consideration of what your actual max is. It was, of course, made for the Bullet King, which is a 100-round mag, basically, underneath it, with other weapons as well. You can see underneath it by just pressing the buttons that the weapons are on, and you can actually see their ammo underneath. That's why, for instance, as well, Optimist does work underneath Bullet Hell still. All things like that kind of still work underneath Bullet Hell. Because of that, you get quite a decent ammo conservation by going a little bit of this extra and keeping that up still. Because of course, the thing is as well, what else would we pick? Honestly, the answer for me would be Surge to maybe get a little bit more my hive back faster. But that's not that important because other things are just kind of meaningless to us. Status effects and such. We could go empowered to make our status effects last longer, but generally if we get any of our status effects triggering, they're going to die pretty quickly, unless they're rogues, basically past 30. So once we have that setup kind of done, we lock in our bullet hell. That's when we kind of really unleash the power of this. And from that point onward as well, as long as you kind of get your reds up to 10, which will generally happen before 25, you should try to get all of your reds then before 25, keeping out the yellows kind of actually till later, because the benefit of the yellows is actually smaller, because for all of these status effect ones, it's 20% for the first step and then 5% for each subsequent step. And generally here as well, basically everything is kind of in their own separate pools, making them kind of separate multipliers. Really, the only things we're overlapping is Rifleman is overlapping with our red picks, and Vigilance is kind of overlapping with Obliterate. Surgical here as well, just to talk about that, because we have, of course, Agonizing. Why would I take Surgical with it? And that is that you can't still, while they have improved Agonizing, you can't still just fully rely on this. We could, of course, drop Surgical there, but then again, it's kind of for what? Because we don't have really great picks. We could keep Pummel, we could try to maybe incorporate Spark, but Spark is kind of also, it's the more total weapon damage. Headshot would kind of go into the same pool as all the critical that we have. We really don't want Unhinged. Close and Personal isn't that much, and also it actually doesn't get that long range, which we're later on we'll kind of you know, if you're shooting across a room at a rogue at a different door, yeah, that kind of doesn't work well. So it's kind of as well, it is kind of a pick that we kind of make for safety, because whenever Agonizing isn't triggered, we still need it for all of the Obliterate and the Strain that we have. That is very important, and a lot of our damage, but is then reliant on just the Surgical and then we don't have the Agonizing Bite at that point. Yeah, let's actually go to the spreadsheet that I kind of prepared, where we'll kind of go over some of the choices we can make here and kind of what those mean. As also to answer a few of my own questions that I had after a run of witch picks and such. I made this spreadsheet and also kind of went a little deeper with it, and just also to highlight a few things. This spreadsheet, of course, is linked down below, so you can go and have a look at it at your own leisure. We'll zoom here in. These are spreadsheets of my design. If you have never seen them before, they're multi-calculators. They compare up to 10 builds to each other, and input happens down here, output happens up here. We're mostly looking at a burst and a sustained DPS numbers, and especially here, not even towards these burst and sustain numbers, but especially the percentage difference between them. Mostly because I don't really have base damage numbers for weapons in in Descent. We could back calculate, that wouldn't be too hard. We can just take whatever number we have, take the red cores basically, and we can from that calculate the base number. But I wasn't gonna go in there and see what a blue vector's base number is now, and I wasn't gonna skim through the footage to find like an exact spot and know how many, and then calculate how many red cores and stuff like that. So I just took 1,000. This is fine because it's 1,000 for all of them. We don't really care about the numbers here or the numbers there. We mostly just care about the percentage difference. That's usually why burst DPS and sustained DPS gets used. Now, this is first off with everything stacked. So this is my end build that we had earlier, the one which was with Rifleman Vigi at the end. We also have the RPMs and such for a vector. Now, of course, a vector couldn't really be used with, for instance, as we'll have here in a second, with bullet hell off, because yeah, it's empty in seconds with that RPM and that max size of 3240 RPM and then 38 max size. But just for kind of just as a discussion piece, kind of. So this first off is with everything stacked there, also all of the status effect amps kind of active. That is our base percentage. Everything else is kind of calculating up against that. So here, for instance, when we have agonizing off, when we don't actually trigger our agonizing, and we, instead of 100% crit chance, we only have 60% crit chance just from having the 10% from Wally and then having 50% from surgical. Our drop, whenever we don't have agonizing up, is basically around 30%, which is a significant drop, of course. This, yeah, if you can trigger your agonizing, you should, but you can't always rely on that, of course. Then, for instance, here, if we actually didn't have a chatter, when chatter isn't there, chatter is the biggest bonus here, and unsurprisingly so. That 100%, 100 to the RPM category, to the RPM pool, because keep in mind as well, RPM is additive to itself as well. So we have two sources of RPM. We have 100% increase from Chatterbox, and we have 70% from the max Allegro. That means that it isn't times one, or well, times two basically, and then times 1.7. It is together a 2.7 multiplier, and they get added together. So it is actually, because otherwise, yeah, this would be 50% of it, of course, if we're doubling our RPM. It's less than that, and yeah, that is the result of this. We do get still, of course, our decent enough output even without Chatterbox, but Chatterbox is definitely the biggest exotic in this set. We definitely want that going, and that's also why we're kind of just wasting quote unquote bullet hell to make sure that we always keep chatter up. We're also not kind of wasting it, because actually bullet hell, it turns out bullet hell is kind of really good. Having, in the same way that I quite often in the main game kind of use fast hands. A lot of people think that is for the sustained DPS, as for instance we see here as well, because of course the burst without bullet hell, the burst is going to stay the same, because it's just now we have reload instead of not having. But then the sustain drops to abysmal numbers. It isn't just the sustain number, it's just the agency that you have whenever you can fire. Keeping it whenever you can fire, you could be hitting weak points, you could be staggering enemies. There is many ways to survive as long as you can fire. That's also why I use fast hands as much as I do in the open world. It's much more so about agency than it is about actually just flat numbers. The numbers don't tell the whole story here. That's always going to be the case with a lot of these talents, of course. Here, I kind of wanted to know, if we didn't pick surgical, how much would we drop? So this is surgical being off and agonizing being off as well, because when agonizing is on, surgical is basically completely meaningless, of course. It's only for 2 seconds, so you can't kind of rely on it to that degree, because also if you're kind of shooting at or trying to help someone across the room or something, it might not be on for a few shots, because it might be not the target that you can shoot at that time. Now that they have changed it, that it tries to go for a close target, that helps a lot with your own door. But yeah, for instance, towards the end of this run, we were 3-man and 2-man. So we were shooting at multiple doors each. When we have this dropping down to 10%, this versus actually, for instance, the agonizing off, this is this number. Interestingly, it is exactly half. So the not having surgical and then having just surgical up but agonizing not triggered is actually exactly half. It's just a coincidence. But that, of course, is, yeah, we're dropping off now a lot. So with that, it would be that we're doing 35% of our damage basically when agonizing isn't trigger, and then. But of course, this isn't the whole story, because we wouldn't just lose surgical and not put anything in its place. We would put something else in its place. But as we discussed, there isn't really something good to put in that place. So surgical, I'm pretty confident in that pick anyway. You kind of need it. You always did, even back in the day where you definitely couldn't rely on agonizing. You can now rely a little bit more on agonizing, but not to the degree that you can completely leave it off. It's much more, just see it, because we're going, of course, when we trigger agonizing, we're going from basically this number to this number. It is a big enough boost to be worth a pick, but you can't just rely on it. So you need surgical underneath it. And then we have actually the choice that I kind of wanted to look at, because as we talked about the triplets that we had the quad that we had that we could definitely pick. Go back here. Surgical, obliterate, strained, and allegro. You kind of definitely want. They seem the safe picks. And then you basically have 2 slots and 3 talents that you can go with. Rifleman, vigilance, and critical. And then all of the combinations of that. So for instance here, Pomic went with critical and vigilance. I went with rifleman and critical. Rifleman and vigilance. Vigilance, of course, can drop off. A rifleman needs headshot. Criticals is kind of always on, but it's kind of also then reliant on agonizing being active for its full output. So kind of, yeah, what do we pick between those 3? And it turns out that the actual pick between those 3 is really going to be this last one, which is vigilance plus crit. It is enough of an increase that I definitely shouldn't pick rifleman plus vigilance for the next run. Just because as well, rifleman is conditional as well. You need to hit headshots. You still go into warhounds. You still go into mini tanks and things like that. So there are definitely things that don't have a head. So vigilance plus crit makes the most sense actually. You can keep the crit up. It turns out that because especially as well, rifleman is just a tiny amount basically, because it is 5% for the first, but then it's 1% for every subsequent step. So it's only 14 times 5, which is not much. It turns out, which I kind of knew, but I already had invested a few in there because I had a few already before the Nemesis, so I just kept going with it. But for next time, I know I'll drop it for vigilance plus crit, because out of these 3 combos. Especially rifleman plus crit kind of lands the lowest. Rifle plus Vigi as the one I had, and Vigi plus crit kind of lands higher. Of course, Vigi drops off when you get hit, but it comes back quickly enough. 4 seconds isn't that big of a deal, and there aren't really meaningful other picks because trying to do the same with Spark is gonna just have less uptime as well. Whenever the turret gets destroyed or gets jammed, for instance, Spark would not trigger quite often as well. Depending on how you place your turret, it might not even be able to shoot anything. So that's kind of the downsides. So vigilance, I think, still is the lesser evil out of this. Let's go to this second part, as the second multi-calculator here is going into the exotic choices. So this is shortenings of the picks we could have, because especially agonizing plus chatterbox and bullet hell is what I went with kind of. That of course allows you to kind of pick things like the vector, things like the RPK kind of as well still with, because RPK would not be enough against especially loop 40 above rogues, I would say. To, for instance, go payment, because payment is the other kind of big boy in that pool, in that rotation. It is of course 200% crit at fully stacked. The thing is, in there, especially with Chatterbox and Agonizing, when we're not firing a 1K RPM or 900 something RPM MPX knockoff, but we're firing, maybe into the 2000s. This, of course, with a vector, without bullet hell, yeah, you really couldn't. You really couldn't. But of course, yeah, later on we can have Chatterbox plus bullet hell plus payment. So instead of Agonizing, having payment. And here as well, the pay 0 is, of course, at 0 stacks. The pay 200 is at 200 stacks. You can actually stack it up fast enough for it to be useful. It is actually one of those ones that I did pick actually for a few loops, just because it didn't give me bullet hell as my on the third exotic. Of course, you have 4 picks still at the fourth at that point. It left out bullet hell, so I had to pick something else, and I went for payment. Payment seems the simple pick, especially we were around loop 11ish and such, where the other choice in plague really doesn't make sense because everything is dying way too fast for plague to really even do anything. So we usually leave it out, and then of course, yeah, liberty or death exists, but but kind of as a comparison point here, just to compare them. And yeah, if we do actually replace bullet hell with payment in kind, we can actually gain a lot of damage, especially when it's stacked. So here, of course, on the burst, it's going to be the same because bullet hell really affects the sustain, really the sustain DPS mostly. This increase is enough, it would seem, of course. Getting to that 200 stacks when you're doing it with much higher RPMs is sustainable. But of course, now you need to kind of drop to lower end weapons. You need to kind of drop to M60s or M249s. They're not going to be able to put out the same as a Vector can, especially with its RPM and its base damage. Its burst is kind of just that much higher. You can kind of still compare weapons in there. In the same way with the burst and the sustain DPS tables that I have, the order kind of still stays the same, is kind of the consensus. Nobody's really checked it because we're not going to do number calculations on those. We're just kind of assuming everything is kind of staying in the same order and that they're scaling somewhat of a fixed number so that everything is kind of staying in that order. Because as well, RPK or L86, you couldn't really pick those, which are the better LMGs. You would definitely have to go into an M60 or such to kind of make this going. And then you're dropping DPS kind of on the weapon choice, not so much on the talent choice. Then if we had Agonizing plus bullet hell plus pay, and so instead of Chatterbox, yeah, that's definitely not a pick. We're dropping up way too much. Chatterbox is the big boy in this rotation. You definitely want to incorporate it, and even, yeah, that, as we talked before, even taking a different exotic, not a damaged one, but just a kind of supporting actor for it, is well worth it. Because here, even payment replacing Chatterbox, Incessant Chatter, even at 200 stacks, it doesn't reach the 5 stacks of the Incessant Chatter, and it's not as if the 5 stacks of the Incessant Chatter is unachievable. This isn't the normal game. This is Descent, and yeah, once we lock it in with bullet hell, we can actually, like, this is our number. We can actually have Incessant Chatter at 5 stacks always there. But then if we went Incessant Chatter plus bullet hell plus payment, so we're leaving out Agonizing, we're keeping this we're basically going for the surgicals amount. This also does not make much sense because, yeah, we're kind of far behind it when Agonizing isn't triggered. Kind of in the same way when Agonizing isn't triggered, that's our low number. And we really need to get up to payment 200, payment to 200 to kind of match up against Agonizing. And we're going to trigger Agonizing enough. So that already kind of made sense to me, just instinctively in there. And also having played around with them, because I've kind of tried other combinations in the past. But yeah, seeing the numbers here, it definitely is one of those things that, because I see a lot of people going for Agonizing Chatter plus pay 200. You kind of can, but yeah, you need to pick lesser weapons that will not have the same burst and sustain DPS numbers as for instance, a Vector can, or a RPK can, or a L86 can, which are, because they are much better weapons. This is not true, this 150%, because you have to kind of drop down to other weapons to actually be able to make this work. Let's go to this last one. And this one is actually just an indicator of how strong separate multipliers are and why we kind of want to go for separate multipliers as often as we can. So this is, if we have the statuses, of course, the ones that we have in Ignited, in ILIS, in Sadist, each of them once at 10, we're kind of using them at 10 here, is 65 each. That's why they are here, and it's kind of just, a pyramid shape. So if we have no status effect, if we take that as our 100%, because yeah, we're not really looking at the burst and sustain DPS numbers, still just, using that base that we're just kind of having as a stand-in. When we go from 0 to 1 status effect, yeah, that makes sense, right? We have 65% increase from 1 amp. Our number is going out by 65%. Now that we're going to 2, and this is the thing that kind of isn't inherently, a lot of people have issues with this or kind of don't understand it. This is also why I'm always, one of my pet peeves is when people go, I have a 65% and a 65%, so I have 130% amp. No, these are multipliers. These are, as some people even call them, multiplicative. The whole point of them is you don't add them together. You multiply them against each other. So, and that is the reason as well why this kind of goes up. Because the thing is, of course, so this on the side here is actually how much each step is more than the first step. So the numbers here are all comparing onto this top one, but this is cascading from here. So each step is, so when we go from one status to this, it's basically taking the second number that we have here and doing it times 165. But from the first number that we started at, it's 272%. It's even more than 100% got added to it. That is why we use separate multipliers. And then, of course, on the third step, it's even more than 150 there. Because, yeah, each step is 160 or 1.65 multiplier of the previous step. But, of course, we're not kind of looking at it from the previous step. We're kind of looking at it from the original step. So each time that we add in one of those multipliers, our numbers go up insanely high. This is the reason why, actually, Envy is so good as that it is. Those multipliers, especially big multipliers or having a lot of small multipliers self-multiplying against each other, gets out of hand quite quickly. This is also the reason why kind of rotations exist, because especially if we could, for instance, have in sync here or intimidate here or things like that, as would be with a free open rotation, that would kind of completely break the balance. Because as well, I hear as we'll go back to that to the picture as we had it at the start. With this, we did reach loop 48. We kind of reached loop 40 at around 6 hour-ish mark. We got up to loop 48 in 6 hours 49. And we didn't really struggle at any point. We kind of just blew through it. It was much more that at the end we kind of chose to end it, more so than that it was that we died or something. We weren't really struggling yet. Envy is strong enough that with these choices you can just kind of coast up to 30, and only past 30 you kind of need to pay attention a little bit. But yeah, let's go take it to a conclusion. And to conclude this video, kind of to show a little bit of how powerful this can be at around loop 40-ish here. Oh, exactly loop 40. This is us melting away rogues. Wrath can't really do this. Greed can't really do this. Other rotations can't really make it this easy. Envy can, if you do it right. And that wasn't a cherry-picked one. I just found the first rogue encounter at around 40-ish that I could find really quickly. Just to kind of show how in play how this kind of happens. Envy is definitely unbeatable, especially if you do it right. I feel the setup that I had, and actually more so the setup that Comic had, which will be linked down below, both of them, is kind of the go-to with it. Especially that setup with getting incessant chatter and then locking it in, and then after that making weapon choices that kind of fit that. I feel that is actually what really carries this, together with, of course, Envy just being really powerful. But I feel this is kind of the better setup for Envy. I just wanted to put that out there for a lot of people that either are wanting to get started with Descent, or those that are maybe more experienced but maybe hadn't tried this. I would definitely recommend trying this setup. And of course, as well, I should show how we ended that run, as for those that don't know it. Generally, what we do is towards the end of the run, if we once we're kind of just done with it, we either check if it's rogues first, because 10 more NSA tech will take. If it isn't rogues, we'll just go into melee only mode and try to smack our way through it. And as you can imagine, melees aren't really that powerful in there, so. Even Breathe Free, you don't get more melee damage out of it, because that is a mod on the Lady Death. It's not the exotic talent, it's a mod, so you don't even have that, even if you had it with Greed. And yeah, we're just going out with a bang, basically. And the reason for that as well is just so we exit together. That way, you can actually share things. Only usually the thing is, the first person to get out will be able to share with all the subsequent people. If you or the other way around, people getting out later, they get to share with people that got out earlier. So you can still get it. But that was a 6 hour 11 minutes run on that day, which is quite long. You definitely don't need to go this deep into Descent. But then also to kind of explain, as I calculated out a little bit later, there is that I got around 4,920-ish NSA tech out of this run. We didn't have that many boss rooms. Could have likely reached 5k on that run. That is the real reason to go deep with Descent. You can, of course, then use those to come over here and either get exotic caches to get grading up, or to get reconstructed caches and try to fill out the entirety of the crafting table, because that is actually quite useful, especially as well for expertise and stuff. Instead of, for instance, trying to get max proficiency with Manic, which is, for instance, a DZ item. Instead of donating this or running this, I can just craft them if I needed that. Of course, I have grade 26 already, but especially for a lot of DZ items, this can be really the better way to get them. Things like death grips and stuff as well. So it is very, very recommended. Although, yeah, we're still kind of stuck with not being at max blueprints, because there are still some missing from last season and the season before it. All the names are missing. This season's ones went incorrectly, so hopefully they'll fix that at some point. But yeah, thanks for joining me, and hope you found this somewhat informative, and can use Envy for either deep runs or, as I have there on my arm patch, for a flawless Descent, because Envy is definitely the go-to for that one. As always, if you enjoyed this content and want to help out, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below, as it does help out. So I will do that little bit of shilling. For my next video, we're gonna actually do the builds showcase on joke builds that I said we were gonna do now, but Envy came around, so I wanted to get this in between, and that will be then followed up by the further parts of improving yourself, as that was very well received, and I really enjoyed making that. As also it actually, I'm using my own tips and tricks, and kind of rationalizing them helps me to actually use them quite better. So yeah, I hope you join me for those, and as always, have a good night.